Jimmy Kimmel, once a sharp-witted comedian, now finds himself ensnared in a Hollywood bubble, a world where the air is thick with self-congratulation and conformity. This environment, steeped in a particular ideological slant, has shaped his trajectory, pulling him far from the raw, rebellious roots of comedy. Critics argue he's traded authenticity for a role as a mouthpiece for the powerful, a shift that has drawn the ire of figures like Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. These two, operating from vastly different corners of the media landscape, have exposed the cracks in Kimmel's carefully curated persona, not through a coordinated attack but through a shared disdain for the sanitized, corporate-approved humor that late-night television has become. The result is a public reckoning for Kimmel, a moment where his smugness and scripted jabs have been laid bare, leaving him floundering in a media world that no longer bows to the old guard. Kimmel's critics see him as a talented performer who's lost his way, someone who's chosen to align with the establishment rather than challenge it. They argue he's become a defender of the status quo, a far cry from the comedian's traditional role of poking fun at those in power. Instead of delivering biting satire, Kimmel's monologues often feel like a checklist of safe, predictable talking points designed to please a specific audience. His detractors wonder how he reconciles this with his earlier days, when he was known for irreverence and edge. How does he look in the mirror and see an honorable reflection? How does he sleep at night, knowing his comedy serves as a prop for the powerful rather than a weapon against them? These questions linger, fueled by a sense that Kimmel has willingly traded his comedic soul for a seat at the table of influence. The critique of Kimmel isn't just about his jokes falling flat, it's about the broader state of late-night comedy, which many now view as a hollow shell of its former self. Once a bastion of sharp-witted rebellion, shows like Kimmel's have morphed into platforms for reinforcing narratives rather than questioning them. The laughter feels forced, the applause orchestrated, the entire production a carefully controlled spectacle. Warm-up acts prime the audience, producers flash applause signs, and writers churn out punchlines that are less about humor and more about signaling allegiance to a particular worldview. The result is a product that's not just unfunny but, to some, contemptible, a betrayal of comedy's role as a truth-teller. Kimmel, in this view, isn't just a comedian who's lost his edge. He's a collaborator in a system that prioritizes narrative over authenticity. Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson, in their own ways, have become the antithesis of this polished, predictable world. Rogan, with his sprawling podcast empire, has built a following by embracing the unfiltered and the chaotic. His conversations, often stretching for hours, dive into everything from quantum physics to conspiracy theories, from martial arts to the mysteries of consciousness. There's no script, no teleprompter, no corporate babysitter sanitizing his words. He's not afraid to offend or to wander into controversial territory, and that rawness resonates with millions. His audience, a mix of skeptics, thinkers, and eccentrics, tunes in for the authenticity, not for polished punchlines. When Rogan critiques the state of modern comedy, he doesn't need to name names. His description of a washed-up host recycling tired political zingers hits its mark without a direct mention of Kimmel. The critique is subtle but devastating, a quiet dagger that cuts through the artifice of late-night television. Tucker Carlson, on the other hand, brings a different kind of fire. Having left the confines of cable news, he's reinvented himself as a digital disruptor, delivering monologues that are sharp, unapologetic, and aimed squarely at the hypocrisy of the media elite. His critiques of late-night comedy don't bother with pleasantries. With a grin that's equal parts mischief and menace, he dismantles the sanctimonious posturing of hosts like Kimmel, who cloak their elitism in laugh tracks and rehearsed smirks. Carlson's approach is surgical, his words a scalpel slicing through the veneer of rebellion that late-night hosts still claim. He doesn't need to mention Kimmel by name either. The archetype he describes, a host who peddles safe, corporate-approved humor while pretending to be edgy, is unmistakable. The effect is a public undressing, a moment where Kimmel's carefully crafted image unravels under the weight of its own contradictions. What makes this moment so striking is that Rogan and Carlson, despite their differences, have converged on the same target. They're not allies, not collaborators, not even in the same orbit. Rogan's a freewheeling conversationalist, a man who'll spend hours debating the merits of psychedelics or the ethics of elk hunting. Carlson's a focused provocateur, his monologues tight and deliberate, each word chosen to maximize impact. Yet, without coordination, they've delivered a 1-2 punch that has left Kimmel reeling. It's not a planned takedown but a cultural shift, a moment where two voices from the fringes have exposed the fragility of the mainstream. Kimmel, once untouchable behind his desk and his laugh track, now finds himself caught in the crossfire, his relevance eroding with every flat joke and forced chuckle. The decline of Kimmel's brand of comedy didn't happen overnight. It crept in gradually, a slow erosion of edge and authenticity. There was a time when Kimmel was genuinely funny, a comedian who could push boundaries and take risks. But somewhere along the line, he made a choice, or perhaps a series of choices, that aligned him with the very power structures comedy is meant to challenge. His monologues, once sharp and unpredictable, now feel like group therapy sessions for a specific ideological crowd, complete with canned laughter and pre-approved talking points. The humor is safe, sanitized, designed not to provoke thought but to reinforce beliefs. It's comedy as comfort food, served to an audience that claps on cue like trained seals. This shift hasn't gone unnoticed, and it's why figures like Rogan and Carlson have found such fertile ground for their critiques. Rogan's platform, in particular, stands in stark contrast to Kimmel's world. His podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, is a cultural juggernaut, pulling in millions of listeners per episode. It's not just the numbers that matter, it's the loyalty of his audience, a diverse coalition of curious minds who value his willingness to explore the unorthodox. Rogan doesn't shy away from controversy, he leans into it, inviting guests who range from Nobel laureates to fringe theorists. His conversations are messy, sprawling, and occasionally absurd, but they're always real. There's no filter, no script, just a man and a microphone chasing truth, or at least something close to it. When he calls out the state of late-night comedy, it's not with venom but with a kind of weary disappointment, as if he's mourning what the medium has become. His critique of hosts like Kimmel, who rely on writers' rooms and teleprompters to deliver pre-chewed punchlines, lands because it's rooted in a deeper truth. Comedy should be dangerous, not domesticated. Carlson, meanwhile, brings a different kind of heat. His departure from Fox News wasn't a retreat but a reinvention, a move that freed him to speak without the constraints of corporate media. His digital monologues are short, sharp, and unrelenting, each one a carefully aimed dart at the hypocrisies of the elite. When he talks about late-night comedy, he doesn't just critique it, he dismantles it, exposing the ways in which hosts like Kimmel have become mouthpieces for the powerful. Carlson's grin, that sly, knowing smile, underscores his point. These hosts aren't rebels, they're enforcers, guarding the narrative with a laugh track and a wink. His takedown of Kimmel's archetype is less about personal animus and more about a broader cultural observation. Comedy, once a tool for challenging authority, has been co-opted into a weapon for upholding it. The irony is that Kimmel didn't have to end up here. He could have stayed true to his roots, could have kept pushing boundaries and taking risks. But somewhere along the way, he chose the path of least resistance, aligning himself with a system that rewards conformity over creativity. His critics point to moments like his tearful monologues on political issues or his sanctimonious jabs at figures like Elon Musk as evidence of his fall. Musk, a lightning rod for controversy, represents the kind of unfiltered, disruptive energy that Kimmel once embodied but now opposes. When Kimmel takes swings at Musk or others who challenge the mainstream, it feels less like comedy and more like a defense of the status quo, a far cry from the comedian's role as a truth-teller. Kimmel's defenders might argue that he's simply adapting to the times, delivering the kind of humor his audience wants. But the numbers tell a different story. Late-night television is hemorrhaging viewers, its relevance fading as audiences turn to platforms like podcasts and social media for entertainment and insight. Rogan's podcast, with its millions of downloads per episode, dwarfs Kimmel's viewership, a stark reminder of where the cultural conversation is happening. Carlson, too, has found a massive audience online, his monologues racking up views that rival the biggest cable news shows. Kimmel, meanwhile, is stuck in a format that feels increasingly antiquated, a relic of a media era that's been overtaken by faster, bolder voices. The contrast between Kimmel and his critics is stark. Rogan and Carlson aren't just winning the attention war, they're redefining it. Rogan's long-form conversations, with their mix of humor, curiosity, and unfiltered debate, are the antithesis of Kimmel's tightly scripted monologues. Carlson's monologues, with their laser focus and unapologetic edge, cut through the noise in a way that Kimmel's predictable jabs never could. Together, they represent a new kind of media, one that thrives on authenticity and risk rather than polish and predictability. Kimmel, for all his talent, has become a symbol of the old guard, a man clinging to a format that's been outpaced by a world that demands more. What's particularly striking about this moment is how effortless Rogan and Carlson's takedown of Kimmel feels. They didn't need to coordinate, didn't need to strategize. They simply spoke their truths, Rogan with his conversational sprawl, Carlson with his surgical precision, and Kimmel's world crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions. It's not just that his comedy isn't funny anymore, it's that it's irrelevant, a relic of a time when a laugh track and a well-timed smirk were enough to carry the day. Today's audiences want more honesty, more risk, more humanity. They're finding it in Rogan's podcast and Carlson's monologues, not in Kimmel's studio, where the applause feels as canned as the jokes. This isn't to say Kimmel is without talent or that his career is over. He's a skilled performer, a man who knows how to work a room and deliver a punchline. But the choices he's made, aligning with the powerful, trading edge for acceptance, have left him vulnerable in a media landscape that rewards authenticity over artifice. Rogan and Carlson, in their own ways, have exposed this vulnerability, not through personal attacks but through the sheer force of their own presence. They've shown what comedy and commentary can be when they're unbound by corporate constraints, when they're driven by a desire to seek truth rather than serve power. In the end, Kimmel's story is a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when a comedian loses sight of their purpose. Comedy, at its best, is a weapon, a way to challenge the powerful and expose their absurdities. Kimmel, once a wielder of that weapon, now seems content to play the court jester, delivering safe, sanitized humor to an audience that's already moved on. Rogan and Carlson, for all their differences, have reminded us what comedy and commentary can be when they're unafraid to take risks, to speak truth, to be real. They didn't set out to take Kimmel down, they didn't need to. They just kept doing what they do, and in doing so, they exposed the hollow core of a once great comedian who's forgotten how to laugh at himself.